this is Alicia from We to Three, and this week I wanted to share in a separate video my miscarriage story from the beginning. Because this channel is new and because all of my followers will be new, I think it's best to start at the beginning. And for those of you going through the same thing out there, I think it's really important for people that have been through miscarriage before to share their stories. Without them, I think it'd be really hard for people to relate to anyone going through the same thing, and it would be really difficult for getting through it without some of the videos that I watched when I was going through it, as well as the blog posts and other things that I read when I was going through the same thing. All of that was super helpful. So my ambition is just to be another voice out there for people that have gone through the same thing. Edwin and I started trying to conceive last year. December of 2013 is when I first went off birth control. I went off it in the intention of not quite starting just yet, but to get my body ready to start trying to conceive. I started temping and charting that month. I think I quit mid-month in my cycle because I was just really done with birth control. I hate birth control. I'm not into it. It makes me feel like a crazy person. So I quit birth control. I stopped in the middle of the month and then started temping and charting. And by March, my cycles had kind of evened out. I could kind of see generally when I was ovulating, even though it was kind of fluctuating, it wasn't always the same. I think I went from having 29-day cycles twice to a 31-day cycle, and then the fourth cycle that I was charting is actually when we got pregnant. That cycle started March of 2014 on the 17th, and for all intents and purposes, it was a normal cycle. And we basically got to the end of it. I was going to a wedding at the end of that cycle, and I was like, I better just take a test before I leave. I think at that point it was only like 7 days past ovulation maybe. So I took a test before I went to the wedding on a Thursday, and it was negative. So I went to that wedding in California, where my family lives, and was just like, great, I'm not pregnant, I get to party. And I hung out and went drinking with my cousins, and I did not behave like a pregnant person because I wasn't aware at the time that I was. And then I got back the next week, and the first symptoms I remember were feeling super euphoric. Not that I'm a moody person, but just for 3 days straight, I was up, like really up, really excited about life. And that was unusual for me. So that was my first signal that something was weird in my body, because that does not usually happen if I have PMS. So that happened, and then I got to Wednesday, and Wednesday would have been a 31-day cycle. And Wednesday morning, usually on my cycles, it would be there first thing in the morning, so I expected to wake up that day and just have it be there. And I woke up and I kind of was like, okay, it's not started. That's kind of weird. So I went to work, and I didn't have any tests at the house, so I went to work and then I walked somewhere to get a test and went back to the office and took one. And it was a clear blue, just plus or minus one. And when I took it, I looked at it for a long time, and now that I have been trying to conceive for a while, I realize now that, like, oh, that is glaringly positive, because now I've had so many negative ones. It's like, no, that is positive. Like, there is anything there, and it's happening. So I took it, and it was very, very faint. It was very faintly positive, and I kind of started to freak out, but not in a way that, like, I ended up even going to get another test. I started to freak out, like, am I seeing things? Have I finally gone crazy? Is this real? Is it not real? So I sent a picture to my friend, Brenna, and I was like, here, take a look at this. And she was like, I think there's barely anything there. I don't know that there's really anything. So I said, oh, okay, forget it. And then I had the extra one. So I went home and I was like, well, maybe I'll try tomorrow morning. Still kind of just thinking, like, I'm crazy. This happens a lot, by the way. Even when we were not trying to get pregnant and I was on birth control, I have a habit of being like, I might be pregnant. Like, I don't know if it's like a paranoia from like when I was trying to really not be pregnant. I don't know. I always think I'm pregnant, so I take tests a lot, even before we were trying to conceive. So I went home, and then the next morning I woke up and I took another one, and it was still kind of faint. It wasn't blaringly positive. It wasn't negative. It just was questionable. It wasn't even something I was familiar with at the time. So I brought it to Edwin and I was like, look at this. Am I pregnant? And he was like, I don't really think so. So I went to work that day still thinking, I'm crazy. I've been seeing things. I have no idea what's going on. And finally, I'd been sitting in my cube all morning and it just got to be too much for me. I finally was just like, I'm gonna go get a digital just to check. Like, at least that'll say negative or positive and it'll be for sure. So I went to the store again and got a test. And at this point, my period was 1 day late. And I went back to the office and I took it, and I could not believe it when it came up positive. It was literally the shock of my life. Because I always do that. I always take a test and assume it'll be negative because I assume I'm just psyching myself out. So it was positive and I freaked out. I could not even, all the stories of people with like their really cute stories of revealing it to their husband, I feel so bad because all I did was text Edwin a picture of the positive test and be like, I think I said 3 expletives. I was like, are you kidding? Look at what just happened. Because I was alone at work and I wish I would not have had that happen at work because it was so hard waiting to share it with someone until like the end of the day. So I got home and we celebrated naturally. It was amazing. And went from there, I called my doctor's office immediately and was like, I have to get in. I'm pregnant, like is what this test has told me. So I went to the doctor, I think it was maybe a week later or so. I think it was the next Monday, and this was a Thursday. And got my blood drawn, got a pregnancy test, and they were like, yep, you're pregnant. Everything looks normal so far. My hormone levels were normal. Now looking back and knowing what I know, I would have thought to myself that they were a little low as far as my HCG level. I thought it was a little low. It was barely within range of what was acceptable. And now that I'm looking back on what had happened in that, that kind of makes sense. So I left that day and was like, okay, everything's fine. But for some reason, just over the next week or two, I just got so nervous. I was super anxious that something was wrong already with the baby. Like, I was very concerned that it wasn't going to grow properly, or I was really worried already that I was going to miscarry. I think I'm actually just naturally an intuitive person, so I think I could tell that something was going on. So I called my doctor and I was like, hey, listen, I don't want to be that patient, but I'm actually like really concerned. I don't have any reason to suspect it's not normal. Everything so far has said it's normal. I feel super sick and my boobs hurt like crap, so I'm sure it's normal as far as like how I was feeling at that point. Nothing would have led me to believe that it wasn't normal. But I had told her, I was like, I'm just feeling really anxious about it. And she said, that's fine. I'll send you for a dating ultrasound just to make sure we have our dates right, and it'll give you like a little bit more peace of mind. And she scheduled it, and when I went in, I was supposed to be about 6 weeks. So at that point, we would have hopefully have seen the fetal pole, maybe even an embryo, and for sure the gestational sac, and all of that should have been there by that point. Maybe even a heartbeat. I know some people see them as early as that. So we go in, and I was super excited because, I mean, I was anxious, but I was still really hopeful. I thought that I was just kind of psyching myself out, again, as I usually do. And we went in, and at the very first ultrasound, they were like, oh, it looks like you're measuring at like 5 weeks. And I was a little confused because, like I said, I'd been temping, I'd been charting. I didn't think that my dates could be that far off just based on my chart. It would have been really hard for that to have been incorrect. So I was like, well, that's weird. But okay, like they could see a fetal pole, they could see a gestational sac, they could see all of that and pretty clearly. So it looked to them like the pregnancy was there and progressing, nothing wrong with it, that I was just a little bit behind. But just in case, my doctor sent me for a checkup the next week to make sure it was progressing. So the next week we go, and at this one we did see a little tiny baby. It was very, very small, and I think I could see the heartbeat but not hear it at that point. And they were still measuring me a week behind of what I originally thought. So at that point when I went in, I thought I was supposed to be 7, almost 8 weeks, and I was just at 6. So that was my first clue that, it was happening, and my doctor kept telling me, don't worry, it's fine. But internally, I was just kind of like, well, that doesn't seem normal, though. Like, everything I'm reading, yeah, people have stories where things aren't normal and then they go on to be normal. But in my mind, I was kind of like, well, this doesn't seem normal, though, and it doesn't seem like there are a lot of good endings with stuff like this happens to people. So we went from that, we were like, okay, the baby's fine, it has a heartbeat, I'm gonna stop worrying. That's kind of what I was just trying to get through my brain. The next week, I had an episode of bleeding and got really freaked out. And so again, I called my doctor. I'm the worst patient on earth, by the way. I am awful. Like, I will literally call my doctor 7 times a day if I were allowed. I can't help it. It's just a thing. I'm sorry. So I called my doctor again when I started bleeding, and it was really light, just spotting, and was like, listen, I'm freaked out again. I'm really worried. And she had me come in and she checked my cervix and she was like, well, everything's closed, so it's fine. You know, it appears to be fine. She checked me in an ultrasound via her really janky ultrasound machine in her office. It's not the kind of like quality that the radiology department has. And she was like, yeah, I can't really tell, but this looks like a fetus with fetal heart movement. It looks fine. It was kind of jumping all over the screen, actually. Like, it looked fine to me from what I could tell also. So after that episode of bleeding, I was like, oh, okay, well, we're fine. So I left the office, and again, for a couple weeks, I was just fine. I really wasn't as worried as anymore. From her perspective, everything was going okay. There was no other sign to be worried about, so we kind of let that episode of bleeding go, and that was the end of it. I think during my 6-week ultrasound, the one where we did see the heartbeat, they also identified a small pocket. They didn't tell me what it was at the time, but it could have been fluid. There was even, on my chart, I read a question of maybe a second gestational sac when they took those pictures. So when I started bleeding, my doctor mentioned, like, hey, there was a small, like, pocket, you know, next to the sac. It could have been that you had a bleed or something and it was just flushing out. So that was one of the explanations she gave as to why it might have happened. So after that, I went on about my day, about my life, and was not worried about it anymore. Fast forward a couple weeks, and we're getting almost to where I would have been 12 weeks, but since I was measuring behind, I was more like 10-ish or 11. It's kind of hard to, like, decipher when I was actually at. I would have said I was at 9 weeks, even though I was supposed to be 11. So at 9 weeks, I was getting ready to go to a friend's baby shower in California, and I was getting ready. It was Friday. I was supposed to leave the next morning at like 7 a.m. or something ridiculous, and I was packing and getting ready, and I started to bleed again. And this time it was a little bit heavier than the spotting I had had originally, and it was darker, and I immediately was freaking out. And like I said, from the beginning of my pregnancy, I'd been a problem patient. I was feeling really guilty about that because I hate to be that person. So I didn't call my doctor. I just was like, okay, I'm bleeding again. She said everything was fine. She said it could happen more because there was that pocket of fluid on the ultrasound. So I'm just going to relax. It's going to be fine. I couldn't do anything about it anyway because I have to leave the next day. What am I going to do? Not go to that shower? I just basically tried to put it out of my mind and be like, it's okay. If it's still happening when I get back, I'll take care of it. I just kind of wanted to ignore it for the time being because I have no idea how I would have gotten through that weekend otherwise. So Friday night, I continued to pack and get ready. And then Saturday morning, I woke up and I didn't have much. It was barely, like, basically non-existent as far as the bleeding goes. And I was like, see, look, it stopped. It's fine. So I go and I get on the plane, and then kind of like right towards the end of the plane ride, I feel a little bit of like a gush, and I was like, oh no. I was like, it's back. And I got off the plane in California and went to the bathroom like immediately, and I was like, great. And it was there again. It wasn't super heavy. I was exaggerating in my brain when I thought it gushed, but when you're not supposed to feel anything gush when you're pregnant, anything feels like, that's not okay, that's wrong. It should not be doing that. So I got off the plane and was bleeding again and spotting, and I was just like, you know, I've been going crazy. I woke up early this morning. I've been really active running throughout airports. I just need to like relax and chill out. So the day of the baby shower was Saturday, and I got to California and hung out with my friends and went to my friend's baby shower, and we had a great time, and then we're hanging out at her house later that night. And later that night, it started to kind of pick up a little bit. It still wasn't super heavy, just spotting, but really was more bleeding than you would want when you're pregnant or think is normal. So I am debating in my mind, do I go to an urgent care? Do I wait till I get home the next day because we were leaving on Sunday? I had literally no idea what to do, and so I just sat there and was battling myself in my brain. And bless my friends' hearts, we were just hanging out and like ignoring it completely. I had told them what was going on. Everyone in my group knew that I was pregnant at this point, basically because I wanted to make sure they knew in case something really happened from this, that if for any reason I started hemorrhaging or something got out of control, that they would take me somewhere to get checked out and know what was happening and not just be like, why is she sick? So we just hung out, we ignored it, I ignored it, and then got on the plane the next morning to come home. And it was still occurring about the same rate, and I was officially just panicking. I got home and I had a huge long debate with my mom, who's a medical professional, and my husband, and we were all just basically like, what do you do? Like, what do we do at this point? Do we say, oh, I'll wait till Monday and go see my actual doctor? Do we go to the ER? Do we go to urgent care? Like, what's the severity of the situation? So I called the nurse hotline when I got home on Sunday and I said, hey, I've been having this bleeding for about 3 days. It's very light. It's spotty. It doesn't seem like it's a huge deal, but I'm a little concerned because it's been going on for so long. And she said, you know, based on the rate of what you're telling me you've spotted, it sounds like it's not a problem. If it does get heavier or you start bleeding really heavily with clotting, go to the emergency room and get it checked out. But otherwise, you should be fine. So for a while, I was like, okay, that satiated me. I was like, I'm fine. She said I'm fine. She described my situation perfectly as far as what was going on. And so I just was like, okay, it's no big deal. It's fine. And after that, maybe approximately an hour after the first conversation, I went to the bathroom and was clotting and really heavily bleeding, to the point where I was like, I'm not sure if we go to the hospital if I am going to need like 7 towels underneath me at this point. And immediately I know what's happening at this point. I was like, no, this is it. Like, I have been waiting all weekend for fearing the worst and knowing it's going to happen. I think even since the beginning of my pregnancy, I mean, I'm not usually a Debbie Downer. It's not in my nature to be really pessimistic about outcomes, but I really think that something inside knew, like, this was not a baby meant to be here on earth with me. Like, I just knew from the beginning that was not what the purpose of me being pregnant was. So we go to the emergency room, and that was probably the worst part, I would say, of my entire miscarriage. I mean, the next day was a lot more painful, but the emergency room, the waiting, the way people look at you when you're in the emergency room, I will tell you right now that was the worst. I wanted to get out of there as soon as we got there. I did not want to be there. But we needed to make sure that if the baby was still viable, that we were doing everything we needed to do. And if not, that we knew what was coming. So we got there, and I think they took blood from me to check levels, and then they also sent in a request for an ultrasound. So we basically waited around in the room, in the triage room, until we got to an ultrasound, and then we went in and saw the ultrasound. And I can remember really vividly Edwin asking a question that just crushes me, is, will we get to hear the heartbeat? And I remember the look on the woman's face, and I remember turning to look at Eddie and being like, don't ask that question. Like, because I knew, but I don't think he knew at that point, like, what was about to happen. And so we just waited, and bless that woman's heart. I'm sure she felt so bad. We are young. We are like 25 years old. Cute as can be, like, really excited to hopefully see our baby again, thinking that, like, hopefully nothing's wrong and, like, maybe this is all a bad dream. But immediately when she pulled up the screen, we could see it, but I could tell that there was not a flicker of a heartbeat. And so we went back to the room, and it was kind of nice, actually, because the ultrasound techs don't get to tell you that, but I could tell, and it was nice for me that I got to know before the doctor had to come in and tell me. I think that was nice to be like, in my own mind, I could like make the diagnosis, but I could tell from my body that that's what was happening. I think it would have been more devastating to have a doctor have to come tell me that news rather than to see it, internalize it, and then have him confirm what I thought I saw. So eventually the doctor did come in and tell us, you know, the baby looks like it stopped developing at around 7 weeks. I'm really sorry, you are miscarrying. They basically gave me some guidelines, like if you're feeling more than a pad an hour, please come back. Like, you know, that means you're hemorrhaging, something's wrong. And send us home from there. And I was like, okay. And then Monday we just like basically called out sick. I knew that we weren't going anywhere, and I kind of wasn't sure what was going to happen at that point. I knew that it would probably be really crampy, and I read some stuff online that was like, you'll cramp really hard and then it'll be fine, it'll be over within a few weeks. And I went home thinking in my mind, I guess, that that's what was going to happen. They did send us and schedule us for a doctor's appointment Monday morning with my doctor as like a follow-up from the ER visit. And when I woke up on Monday morning, I would have had no idea what was about to happen as far as the pain level that would have happened. For the first little bit of the morning, it was just like normal period. It was not a big deal. It was just, you know, slow, steady cramping that really sucked, but, you know, wasn't debilitating. And then around 10 o'clock, I started to panic because it was so excruciating that I was like breathing through it like it was labor. I'd never experienced anything like that in a period before. And poor Edwin was at work, and I had to be like, please come back and get me. Like, I am so scared. Like, don't go to work. Come get me. Like, we have to go to the doctor right now. Bless my doctor's heart. She gave me something really heavy for the pain, just to get me through until we could get to the pharmacy, which was a godsend. Without her doing that, I have no idea what would have happened, but it would have been bad. So she sent us home to get pain medicine and basically just like have a natural miscarriage at home. And that's what happened. I went home, I miscarried naturally, and from there it just continued for the next few weeks. It really continued a lot longer. My blood levels weren't clear until July, and this was June 1st when this all happened. So my pregnancy started March 17th with my new cycle. It ended June 1st, and then it really wasn't over miscarrying until July, which was a really long time. Following that, I had a lot of problems after my miscarriage. I'm still dealing with them. I don't know if something about it just kicked my body into PCOS or what. I'm still waiting on testing, and you'll get a little bit more of that in the cycle 10 update that I'm going to do. I've had, I think, 10 cycles total since I've started tracking. And let's see, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 was the pregnancy. So that's 6 cycles since my pregnancy, and that was last June. Today is February 22nd. That's not how many cycles you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have a lot more. I've had one cycle that was 81 days, finally Prevera induced. I think my next one was 45. And then I finally went back onto my regular cycles, and then it was 30 and 33. And then I had to have another Prevera-induced one. So that's where I'm at today. That's my miscarriage story. It was really long, but I really think it's important to share our voices about miscarriage. We really value the life that was with us for even a short period of time. I think every miscarriage is valuable as far as a story and as far as remembering what was there in the first place. I'd love to hear from others of you that have your own miscarriage stories. I think that YouTube is an incredible place to share our journeys with each other about that, and to really open the door to vulnerability about what a personal story it is for every person. It can be a really ostracizing topic, especially in a community where a lot of people don't have problems, or if you come from a community where a lot of people do have problems and you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to trigger them. So thank you so much for allowing me to kind of vent my miscarriage story out into the universe, and thank you in advance for any comments and stories you share with me about yours. I really want this to be a place where we can talk about that pretty openly, and I would love to be a resource for other people to share their stories and really celebrate the lives that were here even for a short time.